Hello and welcome. Tonight, we're going to tell you a story. It's a story you may think you know, a fairy tale that turned into tragedy, a romance that became a cautionary tale. But like all the best stories told in the quiet hours of the night, this one is about much more than headlines and photographs. It's about two people, caught in a system larger than themselves, trying to find love and meaning in a world that had already written their script for them. Bulimia nervosa, an eating disorder characterized by cycles of binging and purging, a disease of control and pain, of trying to manage overwhelming emotions through the only thing that feels manageable: your body, your food, your physical self. Diana would later link this illness to the isolation she felt within the royal family, the feeling of being unloved, unsupported, trapped in a life she hadn't truly chosen, married to a man who couldn't or wouldn't give her the emotional connection she desperately needed. Eating disorders often emerge when people feel powerless in their lives, when external circumstances feel uncontrollable. The body becomes the battlefield. I can't control my marriage, my public image, my husband's feelings, but I can control this. I can control what goes in and what comes out. Diana later spoke about this with remarkable bravery. She brought attention to bulimia at a time when eating disorders were poorly understood, stigmatized, hidden. She helped countless people by naming her own pain. But in the early 1980s, she was suffering alone. And it wasn't just bulimia. Diana also engaged in self-harm, hurting herself physically as a manifestation of emotional anguish, cutting, scratching, ways of making internal pain external, visible, real. These are not the actions of someone living a fairy tale. These are the actions of someone in profound emotional distress. Diana described feeling overwhelmed by expectation. Every day she had to perform, had to smile, had to be perfect, had to represent the monarchy, represent her marriage, represent an ideal that felt increasingly false. And Charles increasingly retreated emotionally. He didn't know how to help her. Maybe he didn't want to. Maybe he was too caught up in his own dissatisfaction with the marriage, his own sense of having been pushed into something he didn't truly want. Whatever the reason, Diana felt unsupported, scrutinized but not seen, famous but deeply lonely. The public adoration she received, and she received enormous public adoration, couldn't fill the void at the center of her life. In 1983, Charles and Diana embarked on a royal tour of Australia. On the surface, it was a triumph. Massive crowds, enthusiastic reception, the kind of success that the royal family craved. But this tour, often hailed publicly as a great success, privately marked a turning point in their marriage. Diana's popularity eclipsed Charles's, completely, undeniably eclipsed it. Wherever they went, the crowds called for Diana. They wanted to see her, photograph her, touch her hand. Charles was the heir to the throne, the future king, but it was Diana they came to see. Reports suggest this bred resentment in Charles. How could it not? He'd spent his entire life preparing for his role, and now his young wife, his very young, very inexperienced wife, was outshining him at every turn. There's a famous story from this tour. Charles and Diana were working a rope line, greeting people on opposite sides of the crowd. Charles would approach his side, and people would groan, disappointed. "We wanted Diana," they'd call out. "We want to see the princess." Charles reportedly joked about it. "I'm sorry to disappoint you," he'd say. But beneath the jokes, there must have been pain, frustration, the sense of being upstaged in his own life. And for Diana, this adoration was complicated. Yes, It felt good to be loved, to be wanted, to have people respond to her warmth and beauty and charisma. But it also intensified the pressure. It made her more valuable to the monarchy as a public relations tool, but it didn't make her marriage any happier. If anything, it made things worse, adding another layer of tension, another source of competition and resentment. The fairy tale, from the outside, looked more magical than ever. But inside, the cracks were spreading. This is a good moment to pause and reflect on something crucial: the distance between public perception and private reality. To the world, Charles and Diana looked perfect. They were beautiful, wealthy, royal. They had 2 sons, William, born in 1982, and Harry, born in 1984. The family portraits showed a picture of domestic bliss. But pictures lie. Or rather, pictures show only what's in the frame. And life happens in all the spaces cameras can't reach. Behind the glamorous public facade, Diana was struggling with mental health issues that she felt unable to discuss. Charles was emotionally withdrawing, finding connection elsewhere. The marriage was becoming a performance, a duty, rather than a partnership. And here's what makes this so tragic. Both of them were trapped. Diana was trapped by her role, her youth, her lack of power within the royal system. She couldn't just leave. She was the mother of the future king. She had responsibilities, expectations, a gilded cage that was still undeniably a cage. Charles was trapped by his own position, his own history. He'd married the suitable girl, produced the heirs, done his duty. But duty and happiness are not the same thing. And the woman he'd loved, truly loved, was still out there. Still married to someone else. Still present in his thoughts. By the mid-1980s, both Charles and Diana were living divided lives. The public version, smiling for cameras, attending events, playing their roles. And the private version, lonely, resentful, desperately unhappy. The question wasn't if the marriage would crack further. The question was when and how publicly. By around 1986, something shifted. Or perhaps it's more accurate to say that something that had never truly ended resumed openly. Charles had resumed his affair with Camilla Parker Bowles. Camilla was still married to Andrew Parker Bowles. Charles was still married to Diana. But the emotional and now physical connection between Charles and Camilla rekindled. Charles would later claim that this happened only after his marriage to Diana had irretrievably broken down. That he'd tried, that he'd been faithful at first, that he'd only turned to Camilla when the marriage was already beyond saving. But that framing, that justification, conveniently overlooks the timeline. The marriage had been troubled from the beginning, yes, but irretrievably broken down is a phrase that can mean many things. It can be a description of reality, or it can be a retroactive justification for choices already made. What we know for certain is this. By the late 1980s, Charles was in an active affair with the woman he'd loved before he ever proposed to Diana. For Diana, this was devastating. Imagine discovering, or strongly suspecting, that your husband is in love with someone else, someone he knew before you, someone he has history with, someone he perhaps never should have left in the first place. The jealousy Diana felt wasn't just jealousy. It was deeper than that. It was the pain of realizing you were second choice, that you'd been a placeholder, that the man you married had given his heart to someone else long before you arrived, and had never truly taken it back. Diana's feelings of humiliation intensified throughout this period. How could they not? She was famous, photographed, adored by millions. And yet, Her husband preferred someone else, wanted someone else, loved someone else. Diana's suspicions and pain came to a head in 1989 at a party. It was a social event, the kind of gathering where aristocrats and royals mingled, made small talk, maintained appearances. Charles was there, Camilla was there, and Diana, unable to contain her anguish any longer, decided to act. She sought out Camilla privately. Can you imagine that moment? The courage it must have taken, or perhaps the desperation, to walk up to the woman you believe has stolen your husband's heart and confront her face to face. What was said between them has been reported in various ways over the years, but the essence is clear. Diana confronted Camilla about the affair, about the betrayal, about the triangle that had defined her marriage from the beginning. There were 3 of us in this marriage, Diana would later famously say. And in 1989, at that party, she was finally naming the 3rd person out loud. This confrontation was private, but its emotional impact was enormous. It marked Diana moving from silent suffering to active resistance. She was no longer going to pretend she didn't know. She was no longer going to quietly endure her humiliation. But confronting the problem didn't solve it. Charles didn't leave Camilla. The marriage didn't improve. If anything, things got worse, because now the fiction of appearances was harder to maintain. Diana, seeking emotional connection, seeking someone who would make her feel loved, desired, seen, began her own affair. James Hewitt, a cavalry officer, charming, attentive, willing to give Diana the attention and affection she craved. Diana would later admit to this affair publicly, a remarkable and brave confession given the scrutiny she was under. Their relationship lasted years. It was, by Diana's account, a genuine emotional connection. Hewitt made her feel valued in ways Charles hadn't. He listened to her, spent time with her, made her feel like she mattered. But this affair, like Charles's affair with Camilla, complicated the narrative. Both partners had now crossed lines. Both had sought comfort and connection outside their marriage. Both had betrayed their wedding vows, and this is crucial, they did not do so with equal power or protection. Charles was the heir to the throne. He had the institution behind him. The royal family, whatever their private disapproval, would ultimately protect him. His affair with Camilla, while scandalous, wouldn't fundamentally threaten his position. Diana's affair with Hewitt, on the other hand, made her vulnerable. She was already seen as unstable, emotional, difficult by some within the royal circles. An affair confirmed, in their eyes, that she was the problem, not Charles, not the institution, her. This imbalance of power, of protection, of how their respective affairs would be judged, ran through everything that followed. By the end of the 1980s, the marriage was in shambles. Both partners were having affairs. Both were unhappy. Both felt trapped, Charles by duty and expectation, Diana by her relative powerlessness and the public role she couldn't escape. They still appeared together publicly, still did their royal duties, still smiled for the cameras. But anyone paying close attention could see the tension, the distance between them in photographs, the way they avoided looking at each other, the careful choreography of 2 people who could no longer bear to be close. The fairy tale had become a nightmare, a beautiful, public, extraordinarily expensive nightmare. And the worst part? The public was starting to notice. Rumors circulated. Tabloids began sniffing around the edges of the real story. The palace worked to maintain appearances, to keep the marriage looking functional, but it was becoming increasingly difficult. Something was going to break. The question was what and when? and how much damage it would cause when it finally did. New Year's Eve, 1989. While most people were celebrating the end of the decade, preparing for a new year, Diana was having a phone conversation. A private, intimate phone conversation with James Gilby, a close friend, who was, by some accounts, more than a friend. The conversation lasted 30 minutes. 30 minutes of intimate talk, personal revelations, the kind of conversation you'd never want anyone else to hear. Gilby called Diana Squidgy over and over, more than 50 times during that single call. Squidgy this, squidgy that, a term of endearment, a private nickname, the language of intimacy. Diana had no idea that this conversation was being recorded. No idea that years later, this private moment would become public property. That millions of people would hear her voice, her words, her private self exposed. But it was being recorded. Someone, somewhere captured that conversation. The recording didn't surface immediately. It stayed hidden for years, like a bomb waiting to go off. Then, in 1992, it appeared. The tape was allegedly discovered accidentally by members of the public, amateur radio enthusiasts who supposedly picked up the conversation on their equipment and recorded it. That was the official explanation. An accident, a fluke of technology. But technical analysis later suggested this was unlikely. The recording was too clear, too complete. The chances of multiple people independently recording the same conversation on amateur equipment strained credibility. Instead, analysis pointed to something more sinister, a deliberate interception of Diana's phone line. Reports later hinted at possible intelligence service access, though this was never formally proven. The idea that Diana's phones were being tapped, that her privacy was being systematically violated by the very people supposed to protect her, was terrifying and entirely plausible. After all, Diana was the Princess of Wales. She was a national figure, and she was, from the establishment's perspective, increasingly unpredictable, unstable, a threat to the carefully managed image of the monarchy. Why wouldn't they monitor her? Why wouldn't they want to know what she was saying, who she was talking to, what secrets she might be sharing? The full truth may never be known, but the recording existed. It was real, and it was about to become public in the most humiliating way possible. The Sun newspaper got hold of the tape, and they didn't just publish excerpts. They monetized Diana's privacy violation. The Sun allowed the public to dial in and listen to the tapes directly. For the price of a phone call, anyone could hear Diana's private conversation, her intimate moments, her voice saying things she never intended for public consumption. Think about that. Think about the cruelty of it. Your most private conversation, the things you said thinking no one was listening, suddenly available for mass consumption, for entertainment, for profit. Diana privately confirmed to her protection officer that the tape was genuine. She couldn't deny it. The voice was hers. The conversation had happened. She even admitted she had used an official royal phone for that call, a detail that made her vulnerable to accusations of misusing royal resources, of being careless, of bringing scandal on herself. The scandal was dubbed Squidgygate, a play on Watergate, the American political scandal, a cute name for something that was, for Diana, deeply traumatic. Her privacy had been violated, her intimate life exposed, and the public consumed it eagerly, turning her pain into entertainment. But if Diana thought Squidgygate was the worst it could get, she was wrong, because Charles had his own recording scandal coming. There was another tape, another private phone conversation, recorded without the participants' knowledge. This one was from 1989, around the same time as the Squidgygate call. But this conversation was between Charles and Camilla, and it was explicit. The conversation contained sexual content, intimate talk between lovers, things that were deeply private, deeply personal, and deeply embarrassing. One particular exchange, where Charles made a joke about being reincarnated as Camilla's tampon, became infamous. So infamous that the scandal was dubbed both Camillagate and Tampongate, the latter name ensuring that the most humiliating detail would never be forgotten. The tape surfaced publicly in early 1993, but like the Squidgygate tape, there were questions about how it had been obtained. The official explanation, again, that it was accidentally recorded by members of the public, strained credibility. The tape was first published in Australia to bypass British libel law. Australian publications could print things that British newspapers feared to touch, at least initially. Then, once it was out in Australia, British media picked it up, reprinted it, discussed it endlessly. Editors reportedly agonized over whether to publish the Camillagate tape. One editor allegedly locked the tape in a safe, worried about what releasing it might do. Not worried about what it might do to Charles and Camilla personally, but what it might do to the monarchy, to the institution, to Britain's national self-image. There was genuine fear that this level of scandal could destabilize the monarchy itself. Charles was the heir to the throne. If the public lost faith in him completely, what would that mean for the future of the crown? But ultimately, the commercial incentives won out. Scandal sells. People wanted to hear these tapes. They wanted the intimate details, the shocking revelations, the sense of peering behind the curtain at how the powerful really lived. So the tapes were published. And like with Squidgygate, tabloids offered paid dial-in listening services for Camillagate. You could call a number and hear Charles and Camilla's private conversation for yourself. 2 royal scandals, 2 privacy violations, 2 examples of intimate conversations turned into public entertainment, and official explanations for both blame members of the public for accidentally recording these calls. Explanations that fueled suspicion rather than settling it. Were Charles and Diana both being surveilled? Were their phones tapped? Was this the work of intelligence services, or tabloid journalists, or some combination of both? The questions hung in the air, unanswered, but the damage was done. Private pain had been turned into public commodity. The marriage's breakdown wasn't just a personal tragedy anymore. It was a spectacle, a scandal, a story that the entire world was watching, judging, consuming. Take a moment to imagine being Charles or Diana in this period. Every private conversation now suspect, every phone call potentially recorded, every intimate moment at risk of becoming tomorrow's headline. The paranoia that must have induced, the constant fear, the loss of any sense of privacy or safety. Diana later spoke about feeling surveilled, feeling watched, and whether or not her phones were actually tapped, the tapes proved she had reason to worry. Someone had been listening. Someone had captured her most private moments. For Charles, the humiliation was immense. The tampon joke, a silly, sexual comment between lovers, became his defining moment for many people. Years of service, of duty, of trying to do right by his role, and what people remembered was that joke. Both of them had been reduced to caricatures. Diana, the unstable, needy wife. Charles, the adulterer, with bizarre sexual fantasies. The complexity of their situation, the pressures they were under, the institution they were trapped in, the genuine human pain they were experiencing, got lost in the scandal. They became punchlines, characters in a tabloid drama, entertainment for a public that consumed their misery without ever truly understanding it. And still, somehow, they had to continue, had to appear in public, had to maintain the facade of royal dignity. The show, as they say, must go on. December 9th, 1992. The British government made an announcement in Parliament, a formal, official statement about the private lives of two people who had long since lost any claim to privacy. Charles and Diana were formally separating. Prime Minister John Major delivered the news. The Prince and Princess of Wales would live apart. They would continue to carry out their royal duties, but they would no longer maintain the fiction of a functioning marriage. The statement initially said there were no plans for divorce. This was a separation, not an end. Perhaps there was still hope for reconciliation, but no one really believed that. The separation wasn't the beginning of the end. It was the formal acknowledgement that the end had already occurred. The marriage was over. The fairy tale had conclusively failed. And now, the real war began. A phrase emerged to describe what happened next. The War of the Waleses. This wasn't hyperbole. This wasn't tabloid exaggeration. This was an accurate description of a sustained, coordinated campaign of leaks, counter-leaks, and public relations maneuvers. Charles and Diana, unable to fight each other directly, fought through the press. Stories would appear in newspapers, carefully placed, strategically timed. Stories that made Charles look dutiful and Diana unstable. Or stories that made Diana look sympathetic and Charles cold. Each story was a salvo, each headline a weapon. Royal correspondents, those journalists who made their careers covering the monarchy, described it as a family civil war fought through tabloids. And they were right. This wasn't passive. People on both sides were actively cultivating journalists, providing information, shaping narratives. The palace machinery that usually protected royal privacy was now being weaponized to attack family members. Irish diplomatic papers from this period, declassified years later, characterized Diana as exceptionally skilled in media strategy. And she was. Diana understood how to use the press, how to present herself, how to craft a narrative that would win public sympathy. She'd learned, over years of being hunted by photographers and dissected by journalists, how the game worked, and now she was playing it for keeps. Charles, for his part, had his own strategy. His team developed a long-term rehabilitation plan. The goal: reframe Charles in the public mind, not as a cold adulterer, but as dutiful, serious, forward-looking. They emphasized his charitable work, his environmental advocacy, his intellectual interests, his dedication to public service. They cultivated specific journalists, gave exclusive access to friendly reporters, carefully managed his public appearances. It was sophisticated, professional, relentless. Because Charles needed public support. He was the future king. If the British people turned against him completely, if they saw him as irredeemably tainted by scandal, it would threaten not just his reputation, but the monarchy itself. So the rehabilitation project continued, year after year, interview by interview, carefully staged photo opportunity by carefully staged photo opportunity. Even diplomats were paying attention. Irish diplomatic papers from this period show that foreign governments were monitoring the War of the Waleses closely. They recognized that this wasn't just gossip. This was a constitutional issue. The British monarchy's stability affected international relations, trade, diplomatic ties. A weakened crown meant a weakened Britain, at least symbolically. So diplomats watched. they filed reports. They tried to understand how this very public marital breakdown would affect the institution, the country, the world order. The marriage of two people had become an international concern. Behind the scenes, Prime Minister John Major was working to manage the fallout. Quietly, carefully, trying to protect the monarchy without appearing to take sides. Major understood that this scandal threatened more than two individuals. It threatened an institution that was central to British national identity. The monarchy's stability was, in some ways, Britain's stability. So Major acted. He counselled. He strategized. He tried to find a path forward that would preserve the crown while acknowledging the reality of the failed marriage. It was a delicate balance, and it required navigating not just Charles and Diana's wishes, but the Queen's concerns, public opinion, constitutional requirements, and international perception. Major never sought credit for this work. It wasn't the kind of thing that wins elections, but he understood the stakes, and he acted accordingly. The government, like the palace, like the press, was now part of this story. By 1994, two competing narratives had emerged. In one narrative, Diana was the victim. Young, naive, married off to a man who never loved her. Betrayed by Charles's ongoing affair with Camilla. Struggling with mental health issues because of the cruelty and coldness of the royal family. Sympathetic, tragic, a princess in distress. In the other narrative, Diana was the problem. Unstable, manipulative, attention-seeking, unable to handle the pressures of royal life, having her own affair while condemning Charles for his, using her children as pawns, using the press for sympathy. Which narrative was true? Both in different ways, and neither completely. The truth, as always, was more complex than either narrative allowed. Diana was both victim and agent, both suffering and strategic. Charles was both constrained by duty and responsible for his choices. But nuance doesn't sell newspapers. Complexity doesn't fit in headlines. So the public chose sides. Diana's supporters versus Charles's defenders. Team Diana versus Team Charles. And the war continued. In 1994, Charles decided to sit for a television interview. The interviewer was Jonathan Dimbleby, a respected broadcaster. The goal was to humanize Charles, to let him tell his side of the story, to begin the rehabilitation of his public image. The interview aired. Charles spoke about his life, his marriage, his regrets. He was thoughtful, articulate, measured. And then came the question everyone was waiting for. Had he been faithful to Diana? Charles's answer, yes, absolutely. A pause. Then he added, until it became irretrievably broken down, us both having tried. That qualifier, until it became irretrievably broken down, was crucial. Charles was admitting to the affair, but framing it as something that happened only after the marriage was already over. Only after both of them had tried and failed. His private secretary later confirmed what everyone suspected. The unnamed woman Charles had been unfaithful with was Camilla. Charles thought he was being honest, thought he was taking responsibility while also explaining the context. But the public heard something else. They heard an admission of adultery. They heard the heir to the throne confessing to betraying his wedding vows. A poll conducted after the interview showed devastating results. 2/3 of respondents now thought Charles was unfit to be king. 2/3. That's not a vocal minority. That's a majority of the British public saying the heir to the throne had disqualified himself through his behavior. This was a crisis. Charles's rehabilitation plan hadn't just failed, It had backfired spectacularly. The palace went into damage control mode, but the damage was done. Charles had confirmed what people suspected, and in doing so, he'd lost public trust. If Charles thought he'd gotten ahead of the story, he was wrong. He'd simply added fuel to the fire, and Diana, watching this unfold, knew it was her turn. Diana had been cooperating with a journalist named Andrew Morton on a book titled Diana, Her True Story. She did this secretly, through intermediaries, providing information, confirming details, guiding the narrative, all while maintaining plausible deniability. When the book was published in 1992, it was explosive. It detailed Charles's affair with Camilla, Diana's bulimia and self-harm, her loneliness and despair, the coldness of the royal family. Diana initially denied cooperating with the book, but everyone knew. Everyone could tell these were Diana's words, Diana's perspective, Diana's pain. The book was her counterattack. Charles had the institutional support. Diana had public sympathy, and she was brilliant at cultivating it. But the book was just the opening salvo. Diana had something bigger planned. November 5th, 1995, Diana recorded an interview in secret at Kensington Palace. The interviewer was Martin Bashir, a journalist from the BBC's Panorama programme. What Diana didn't fully know, what wouldn't come to light for years, was how Bashir had gained access to her. Bashir had shown Diana forged documents, bank statements that appeared to show people in her inner circle being paid by intelligence services. Evidence, he claimed, that she was being surveilled, spied on, betrayed by those closest to her. None of it was real. Bashir had fabricated the documents to feed Diana's fears, to make her feel vulnerable, to convince her that she needed to tell her story publicly before others told it for her. It was manipulation, a violation of journalistic ethics, a betrayal of Diana's trust. But Diana, believing the documents were real, believing she was under threat, agreed to the interview. The interview was broadcast on November 20th, 1995. Deliberately, strategically, on Charles's birthday. The timing wasn't accidental. Diana knew exactly what she was doing. This was her moment, and she was taking it. 23 million people in the UK watched, millions more around the world. Diana spoke with remarkable candor about her marriage, about Charles's affair with Camilla, about her own affair with James Hewitt, which she admitted to publicly for the first time. She spoke about her bulimia, her self-harm, her struggles with mental health. She spoke about feeling abandoned by the royal family. And then she said the line that would define her, the marriage, and this entire painful chapter of royal history. There were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded. 3 of us, Diana, Charles, and Camilla. The triangle that had existed from the beginning, now publicly named. The line was perfect, concise, devastating, memorable. It captured years of pain in a single sentence. The interview intensified pressure for divorce. If there had been any hope of reconciliation, and there probably hadn't been, the Panorama interview killed it. Diana had gone public in the most dramatic way possible. She'd broken royal protocol, violated the unwritten rules of discretion and privacy that the monarchy depends on. She'd chosen truth over propriety, or at least she'd chosen her version of truth. The palace was furious. Diana had made a unilateral decision to air the family's dirty laundry on national television. She'd embarrassed the institution, damaged the monarchy's carefully maintained image. But she'd also won the public relations war, at least in that moment. Public sympathy was firmly with Diana. Charles was the villain. Camilla was the other woman. And Diana was the wronged wife, finally telling her truth. The interview changed everything. There was no going back, no more pretending, no more hoping things might somehow work out. The marriage was over, officially, finally, irreversibly over. After the Panorama interview, Queen Elizabeth II made a decision. She wrote to both Charles and Diana, urging them to divorce. This wasn't a suggestion. When the Queen writes to tell you what she thinks you should do, you do it. Elizabeth II understood that this situation had become untenable. The public fighting, the competing narratives, the scandals. It was damaging the monarchy. It had to end. A formal divorce would at least bring clarity. It would close this chapter, allowing everyone to move forward. So the Queen intervened, and the divorce proceedings began. The divorce was finalized in August 1996. Nearly 4 years after the separation, 15 years after the wedding. A lifetime's worth of pain condensed into a legal document. The terms were negotiated carefully. Diana would lose the HRH style, Her Royal Highness. She would no longer be Her Royal Highness the Princess of Wales. Instead, she would be Diana, Princess of Wales. A subtle difference in wording that marked a significant difference in status. The title change was reportedly Diana's biggest point of contention. Being HRH meant something. It conferred status, respect, a place in the royal hierarchy. Losing it felt like a demotion, a punishment, another way the institution was pushing her out. But she remained Princess of Wales. She kept her apartment at Kensington Palace. She received a substantial financial settlement, reportedly £17 million plus ongoing expenses. And crucially, she retained shared custody of William and Harry. The children were always her priority. Whatever else happened, however much she and Charles fought, William and Harry were hers. She would continue to be their mother, to be present in their lives. Something surprising happened after the divorce. Diana later told journalist Tina Brown, who would go on to write a comprehensive biography of Diana, that she and Charles were on better terms than they had been in years. With the pressure of the marriage gone, with the expectations lifted, they could finally interact without all the accumulated resentment and pain. They weren't friends exactly, but they could co-parent. They could be civil. They could exist in each other's orbits without constant conflict. Diana even admitted something remarkable. She accepted that Camilla was Charles's enduring love. She'd fought against it for years, hated it, been destroyed by it. But now, with distance, with the divorce finalized, she could acknowledge the truth. Charles loved Camilla, had always loved Camilla, would probably always love Camilla. Diana couldn't change that, and she was beginning to accept it. But then Diana said something even more surprising. She told Tina Brown that despite everything, despite the affairs, the betrayals, the public warfare, she would have gone back to Charles if he'd asked. Would have gone back. After everything. After the divorce was finalized. After she'd publicly condemned him, exposed him, fought him through every available channel. If he had asked, she would have returned. That admission reveals something profound about Diana, about love and pain and the human need for connection, about how complicated feelings can be, how we can hate and love the same person, want to escape and want to return simultaneously. Diana was free, legally separated from a marriage that had caused her immense suffering. But emotionally, she was still entangled. Post-divorce, Diana's life changed dramatically. She lost automatic 24/7 royal protection. This was a significant shift. As Princess of Wales, married to the heir to the throne, Diana had been surrounded by security, armed protection officers, secure vehicles, a whole apparatus designed to keep her safe. Now, post-divorce, she was still famous, arguably more famous than ever, but she no longer had the same level of protection. She could hire her own security, and she did, but it wasn't the same as having the full resources of the Royal Protection Unit behind her. This change increased her freedom. She could move more easily, make her own decisions, live her life without constant oversight, but it also increased her risk. The paparazzi pressure on Diana intensified dramatically after the divorce. She'd always been photographed extensively. That came with being Princess of Wales. But post-divorce, the intensity increased. She was now independent, potentially dating, living her own life. Every outing was an opportunity for a photograph. Every man she spoke to a potential new romance. Every outfit, every expression, every moment documented and analyzed. The paparazzi weren't just observing Diana's life. They were hunting her. Photographers would follow her car, stake out her home, chase her through the streets. Anything for a photograph, a scoop, an exclusive. Diana sought legal protection against this harassment. She took photographers to court. She warned publicly that the constant pursuit could lead to a serious accident. She knew the danger she was in. She told people. She tried to get protection. But the paparazzi didn't stop. If anything, her protests made her more valuable. A princess complaining about photographers. That's a story. That sells papers. Summer 1997. Diana was in Paris with Dodi Fayed, the son of Egyptian businessman Mohammed Al-Fayed. They were dating, or beginning to date. The relationship was new, uncertain, but the press treated it as a major romance. Photographers followed them everywhere. On the night of August 31st, Diana and Dodi left the Ritz Hotel, trying to evade the paparazzi. They got into a Mercedes, driven by Henri Paul, hotel security, not Diana's usual royal protection. The plan was to drive to Dodi's apartment, to escape the photographers, to have privacy. But the photographers followed. Multiple cars, multiple motorcycles, pursuing the Mercedes through the streets of Paris. Henri Paul accelerated. The paparazzi kept pace. The chase continued, faster and faster, through the city at night. And then they entered the Pont de l'Alma tunnel. What happened in that tunnel has been analyzed, investigated, debated endlessly. The basic facts: Henri Paul lost control of the vehicle. The Mercedes crashed into a pillar. The impact was catastrophic. Dodi Fayed died at the scene. Henri Paul died at the scene. Diana, in the back seat, was critically injured. She was rushed to a hospital. Doctors fought to save her, but her injuries were too severe. Diana, Princess of Wales, died in the early morning hours of August 31st, 1997. She was 36 years old. In 2008, a formal inquest into Diana's death reached its conclusion. The verdict: the crash resulted from reckless driving and the pursuit by paparazzi. It was not assassination. It was not a conspiracy. It was a tragic accident. Henri Paul was drunk. His blood alcohol level was well above the legal limit. He was also on medication. He was in no condition to drive, let alone to drive at high speed through a tunnel while being chased. The paparazzi pursuit contributed to the crash. The pressure, the chase, the constant harassment, it created the conditions that led to Henri Paul's fatal error. Diana had warned this could happen. She'd said the paparazzi pressure could lead to a serious accident, and she was right. Historians now frame Diana's death as the tragic endpoint of forces unleashed by her marriage's collapse. Media obsession, reduced protection, emotional volatility. All of these factors, all stemming from the breakdown of her marriage to Charles, converged in that tunnel in Paris. If Diana had still been Princess of Wales, married to Charles, she would have had full royal protection. She wouldn't have been in that car with Henri Paul. She wouldn't have been relying on non-royal security. If the marriage hadn't collapsed so publicly, so spectacularly, the media obsession might have been less intense. The paparazzi might have been less aggressive. She might not have been chased. If she'd found peace after the divorce, if she hadn't been seeking love and validation through new relationships, she might not have been in Paris at all. These are all counterfactuals. We can't know what would have happened in a different timeline. But what we do know is this: Diana's death was connected to her life. And her life, for 15 years, had been defined by her marriage to Charles. A marriage that began with secrets and imbalance. A marriage that brought her fame and pain in equal measure. A marriage that in the end may have contributed to her death. So that's the story, the full story, as best as we can tell it in the quiet hours of the night. Diana and Charles. A marriage that was supposed to be a fairy tale, that became a nightmare, that ended in divorce, and then in tragedy. What can we learn from this story? Perhaps we learn about the dangers of institutional pressure. Charles was pushed to marry someone suitable, not someone he loved. Diana was pushed into a role she wasn't prepared for. Perhaps we learn about the importance of honesty. Charles's inability or unwillingness to be fully honest with Diana about Camilla poisoned their marriage from the start. Perhaps we learn about the cruelty of public scrutiny. Both Charles and Diana were reduced to caricatures, their complex humanity flattened into tabloid narratives. Perhaps we learn about power imbalances. Charles had the institution behind him. Diana had public sympathy, but little actual power. Or perhaps we learn something simpler, that love matters, that marrying someone you don't truly love, or who doesn't truly love you, rarely ends well. That duty and expectation cannot substitute for genuine connection. Throughout this story, it's easy to focus on the spectacle. The scandals, the affairs, the tapes, the interviews. But beneath all of that were two people. Two flawed, complicated, human people. Charles, trapped by expectation and duty, unable to marry the woman he loved, resenting the marriage he felt pushed into. Diana, young and vulnerable, thrust into a role that would have challenged anyone, betrayed by a husband who couldn't or wouldn't love her. Both of them made mistakes. Both of them caused pain. Both of them suffered. And in the end, Diana paid the ultimate price. Diana's death shocked the world. The outpouring of grief was unprecedented. Millions mourned a princess they'd never met but felt they knew. Her funeral was watched by billions. The flowers outside Kensington Palace stretched as far as the eye could see. The world wept for Diana. Charles, meanwhile, had to navigate his own complicated grief. This was the woman he'd been married to for 15 years, the mother of his children, someone he'd hurt, who'd hurt him, who he'd fought with and separated from, but also someone he'd once cared for, someone whose death was shocking and tragic and in some way connected to their shared history. Years later, Charles would marry Camilla, the woman he'd loved all along. They would build a life together, quieter, more private, less scrutinized. William and Harry would grow up without their mother. They would speak years later about her absence, about the hole she left, about the mother they lost too soon. And the public would continue to debate, to analyze, to remember. Was Diana a victim or a manipulator? A tragic figure or a savvy operator? A saint or a deeply flawed human being? The answer, as always, is complex. She was all of these things, none of these things, something in between. She was a woman who lived an extraordinary life under extraordinary pressure, who made mistakes and showed courage, who suffered and who fought back, and whose story, even now, decades later, still captivates us. Why do we still care about Diana and Charles? Why does this story still resonate? Perhaps because it reminds us that fairy tales aren't real, that even princes and princesses are human, with human problems and human pain. Perhaps because it reveals the cost of living in the public eye, the way fame can become a prison, the way scrutiny can destroy. Perhaps because we see ourselves in their story. We've all felt unloved. We've all been in relationships that didn't work. We've all struggled with expectation and disappointment. Or perhaps we care because Diana made us care, because she broke through the royal reserve and showed us her humanity, because she suffered publicly and turned that suffering into something meaningful. Advocacy for AIDS patients, for landmine victims, for anyone who felt marginalized or forgotten. Diana died too young, but she lived fully, messily, publicly, bravely. And her story, for all its pain, reminds us of something important, that behind every headline is a human being, that even the most famous, most photographed, most discussed people are still just people, trying to find love, trying to find meaning, trying to survive. As this long night comes to a close, as this story finds its end, remember this. Charles and Diana's marriage failed, but from that failure came lessons, awareness, change. The royal family became more human, more accessible. Mental health became less stigmatized. The dangers of paparazzi culture became clearer. Diana's death was a tragedy, but her life, complicated, controversial, courageous, mattered. She mattered. And her story, told here in the quiet hours, reminds us that even fairy tales have footnotes. Even princesses are human. Even love, when it goes wrong, leaves scars. But those scars can heal. That pain can transform into something meaningful. And the story, once told, becomes part of our collective memory, part of how we understand ourselves, our world, our complicated relationship with love and fame, and the impossible standards we place on those we elevate. Diana, Princess of Wales, remembered, mourned, still, even now, not quite forgotten. May she rest in peace.